hustle culture has just got to stop. The days of us seeing like, we got to be on the grind. We need more followers. We need more of this, right? More monthly reoccurring revenue, more income coming through, more houses, more cars. Like that's got to be behind all of us at some point.
If that person is listening to you right now saying, I didn't know there was another way to be successful, what would you tell them?
Follow your gut, follow that instinct, right? If you feel like something doesn't seem right, maybe it's not right.
Have you met entrepreneurs who kind of still hold those values? Like, do you see them and you see your old self in them? What is that like?
You're not gonna make me cry again, are you?
I am crying already, so you're gonna join me very soon.
It actually makes me sad. It's the only emotion I can give. Man, at one point, oh, thank you. These are all things that I was just like, man, like that really was me. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit because I'm like, man, I hope that they're thinking about their life holistically, that they don't end up on a deathbed one day and say, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Welcome back to the podcast. I am here with Alex Sanfilippo. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Super excited about it.
I am very excited about talking to you. So we need an icebreaker. Don't you think we need an icebreaker?
I'm always worried to say yes with anything with you, but sure, yes, we need one.
We're too cold, so let's break the ice.
Let's go. I'm a little scared, a little nervous, but okay.
What is your favorite TV show or podcast that you're binging on right now?
All right, so fun fact about me, I don't actually own a TV, but if I'm going to go back in time to a show I've watched the most, I really enjoy two of them. The Office, right? I worked in an office for 15 years, so that was like just, I saw myself in that. I'm not going to tell you who I thought I was, but I saw myself in that, so I like that.
Yes.
There was another one that was a YouTube show that I really enjoyed. It was called Video Game High School. The whole concept is it's made by a guy named Freddie W. Rocket Jump was his company. He's now a podcaster, not a YouTuber, which is actually pretty cool. But he built this thing. The whole idea is imagine your high school experience, but all the different classes and things you go to throughout the day are all video game related. So like math is rhythm gaming. You have a drift class. The cool kids were the first person shooter games. Anyway, those are two things I really enjoyed.
That is
from
awesome.
TV perspective.
I think my kids would really like that kind of lifestyle.
Maybe.
Like that's what
they like the lifestyle. Yeah. The show itself, I'm told, is super nerdy, but I'm a podcaster. So it's kind of in my DNA at this point. But yeah, the idea of that being an actual school, I would have done a lot better in school. That's for sure.
So Alex, you have created multiple different products for podcasters to a ton of success. Like thousands of people have used your products to make their podcasts better, to get better guests, to become better hosts, like to make more money with their podcast. You create pretty much an app for everything in terms of podcasting. My question to you is, does that sound like success to you? Do you see that? And do you have a relationship with success when you see your track record?
Yes and no. And the reason I say that is like, yes, on paper, it's all doing very well, very successful. I'm super thankful for that. As an entrepreneur, I tend to be overly ambitious and kind of always looking to the next thing, which is actually, I'll admit, is not really a great trait, like a character trait, right? Like I'd rather be like, yeah, I've hit these goals. I should be really happy here. Typically I hit a goal. I'm like, great, let's keep on moving. What's next, right? And I don't think that's necessarily a great trait, but I see it in most entrepreneurs. And so we forget the success of where we are today versus where we want to go. I'm super thankful, super grateful, love the community. I actually think I'm starting to have a breakthrough in this area and having my perspective be right. But the reality is sometimes I feel like I'm too forward thinking and I won't stop and celebrate where I am today. Mm-hmm. And just full transparency there, right? Like, yes, on paper, everything is doing really well. Internally, sometimes I feel like I'm just not where I need to be yet. And it's funny, if I could talk to Alex from 5 years ago, even just 5 years, which isn't really that long, that Alex would look at me and be like, dude, we've arrived, we've made it, how cool. And I would say today, yeah, I guess, right? And that's actually something I'm a little bit ashamed to even say, but the reality is that's kind of maybe what also drives the business forward. I don't even know. But the thing is like, yes, super thankful, but at the same time, learning to actually just abide in that thankfulness versus looking a year, 2, 3 years ahead.
Yeah, well, you're not alone, right? Like the reason I asked this question is specifically because there are so many people out there who struggle to see how far they have come based on where they've been, just because when you look online, you're always going to find somebody who's more successful than you, right? And comparison sets in. But that doesn't seem to have really stopped you. It's like that, it seems like there is that relationship with success that you're still very ambivalent about, but at the same time, you keep on going and reaching higher levels of success by any standards and by Alex from 5 years ago standards. What do you think is the difference between you, somebody who can really go for it, even though you're feeling this like tiny like imposter syndrome going at the same time, and somebody who feels imposter syndrome, but that's a good reason enough to never even start?
I'm really good at not comparing where I am today to somebody else who's further along. And for many people in entrepreneurial space, like we look at someone who's 20 years in, right? We've all probably heard this at this point, but like, don't compare your day one to someone else's year 20. And I am very good at measuring that. So I can look at it and say, okay, well, Ina's she's been doing this longer than me. That's why I'm not there. And I'm okay with that. And also I do my best to not look at those things. So I use a very simple tool called Newsfeed Eradicator, which is like a free Chrome extension plugin that just hides all of your news feeds on all social media. And because if I do look at that stuff, I start comparing myself, which I just think is the nature of most of these things. We'll look at it and be like, oh man, do I need to do in-person interviews like Ina's doing now, right? Like these type of things settle in. The reality is maybe, but at the same time, if that's not my main focus, maybe not. And so again, I'm good at not comparing myself to other people and their future. And I'm good at not looking as well. And I think that temptation to look is often the cause of imposter syndrome, what keeps us like that. And so my battles are different in the sense that they're very internal. It's my own drive. And a lot of that probably goes back to even my upbringing. My dad was an entrepreneur, always looking for more and more and more and more, right? Could even be my DNA. And that's where good coaching comes into play to help out. But the thing is, I've gotten very good about continuing to drive forward on my own journey, my own mission, because I'm not looking at anybody else's. Of course, I look for advice and stuff like that, but I'm not saying, okay, what else can I look at and see that someone else is doing? And like, oh man, I got to get there. I'm not doing that. And I think that makes it healthier. Like I said, I'm still on this journey myself and starting to get some breakthrough, but that's one of the big things that's helped me a lot is not looking at where other people are.
I'm going to actually go way back in time because you were on my former podcast and we had a great conversation that I kind of want to go a little bit deeper on. We talked about your first success story was before the 2008 market crash with real estate, right? You were 19 years old. You had it made. You were an extremely successful real estate investor. Then the market crashes. Everything just like goes down the drain and you kind of have to start over from zero. But and that is a very interesting story in itself. But the parts that really started to move me were how you describe what your personality was like before that happened, what your lifestyle was like, the kind of people that you interacted with. You were a completely different, if anybody, I know Alex personally, and you are like the nicest guy in the world. What you described from when you were 19, that's not this Alex. Can you share with everybody a little bit of what that life was like?
Yeah. You're not going to make me cry again, are you?
I am crying already, so you're going to join me very soon.
So for everybody listening, watching, whatever it might be, I've only cried on one podcast ever, and it was with yours truly, Ina. So at that point in my life, I come from an entrepreneurial family, and I learned really young, at a young age, that's actually what I was good at. And just knowing that, I always did like weird things. Like eBay came out when I was a kid, so I started flipping things on eBay, right? And I grew very confident in my ability to create wealth, to create money. And along with that, typically comes just really bad lifestyle habits, really bad egos. And it's not necessarily like that for everybody, but most people, especially at a young age, like when you meet a 25-year-old that's like crushed it in crypto, and I'm not picking on anybody specific, but typically they are very prideful, very arrogant, right? And that's because they're like, I've done it all. Everyone wishes they could be me, right? And I can remember at that age, 18, 19, 20 years old even, becoming that person. And what really set that on fire was the fact that some people were like, man, you're 16 years old making more than most like people in their prime are making. And I'll never forget, I saw this magazine. It was actually at a dental office. And this is going back before like smartphones were things. So you just sit there and stare at a TV or something, right? There was a Forbes magazine. It had Forbes 30 under 30 in it. And I saw that and I was like, my goal, my life's purpose is to be a Forbes 30 under 30. And I just like personified who I thought that was. It was a prideful, arrogant person, right? And the reality is everything was working fine for me at that point. But what comes with that are really shallow friendships, really shallow relationships. if everything is about the money and about the wealth that comes with it and the lifestyle that comes with it, most of that stuff is a facade. Because when you talk to really successful people, the ones that are actually happy, they say that that has very little to do with their happiness, with their joy. It's the friendships, it's the relationships, right? It's the meaningful experiences that are happening. And I was not focused on any of that. I didn't prioritize, I didn't have time for it. And so I was a really prideful individual. And if it didn't get me ahead, I wasn't going to help others with it. And I'm glad you said this. I have done a full 180, completely changed. But at that point in my life, that's who I was. And even when I was doing well, if I can just be fully honest here, I was really miserable and I was stressed and depressed and didn't even know it. It was just, I kept myself fueled by dollars coming in.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Because that, just looking at the complete change that you have done just in your internal life, it just gives me hope for a lot of other people that have gone through the same thing or that may be experiencing the same. Because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs and they go and they follow other people who have more of that, like those values. And it's hard for them to kind of realize, like, maybe I'm not in alignment with it, but they're the ones who are successful. So maybe I'm doing something wrong if I feel like there's something off. So I want everybody to hear that out loud. So have you met entrepreneurs who kind of still hold those values? Like, do you see them and you see your old self in them? What is that like?
It actually makes me sad is the only emotion I can give. And it's because I know that, yes, they have more people around them than I have right now. So I have a good amount of friends. I'm super thankful for that. But I had more people around me before, but I knew it was all face value. I knew it was a facade. And so I see these individuals, I can actually, because I feel that I've been there, not that I can read people like a book, right? But I can see that. And I can tell, I know deep down they're hurting and they feel alone because that's where I was. And they're really scared because they know that if this goes away, so does all this. Mm-hmm. And not to say that they're not doing well, but what is success at the end of the day? What is the definition of success? To me, back then, I was doing really well, especially for my age. I was 19. Like, let's be real. Like, just to make it as real as we can. I didn't have very many bills. Like, there wasn't much going on. Yes, I had my own place, my own car, like all that stuff, right? But like, I was a 19-year-old kid. There was very little concern in my life, but it didn't feel like success, even though the world said that is success. And so I was like, well, I guess I just keep on going down this path. And I feel so many entrepreneurs are like, if I can just hit this threshold or make this connection, like that's success, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is, I don't know the true definition of success, but again, because I'm on this journey myself, still seeking that. But I find it's a sense of inner peace and feeling of true accomplishment in a way that actually serves somebody else versus yourself. And I think that you're really good at that. Like, you're really good at saying, I'm great with a tiny audience because I know I'm serving somebody really well, and I can have that relationship with them. That to me is so much more than being like, I got 1 million users on my platform. I'm like, there's not a name behind a user. And like, do you sleep well at night with that? And maybe you do. But again, I think success has so much more to do with just this feeling of I'm accomplished. I feel good. I have this peace, right? And so when I see those entrepreneurs that are like really heavy in the game, especially people that are like in that hustle culture and stuff like that, and the mentality of more and more and more, I can look at them and just, I feel hurt for them because I was like, man, at one point, although I was young, that really was me. And it kind of breaks my heart a little bit because I'm like, man, I hope that they're thinking about their life holistically, that they don't end up on a deathbed one day and say, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
I want you to imagine that there's somebody listening right now who's hearing you and they're thinking, wow, my coach is like that. My coach holds those values. Something has always felt off, but I've always shrugged it off to, they're more successful than me. So I guess that's just the way that I need to be. And I need to change my entire marketing plan and my entire business plan to adjust to those values and those principles. If that person is listening to you right now saying, wow, maybe there's another way. I didn't know there was another way to be successful. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, follow your gut, follow that instinct, right? If you feel like something doesn't seem right, maybe it's not right. And for me being in software, right? So forget podcasting software, but software in general, the culture behind it is very much so, what's your MRR, monthly recurring revenue? How many users do you have? Right? Like, these are the type of questions. How much data are you getting from those people? These are the questions that come up. When I first got into it, I was like, I need a coach. I need help. Again, coming out of that world, everyone I met with, and they're not all like this, but every time it was a red flag. How are we going to get your MRR up? Yes, and that's important. Sure, like, we need to be able to pay the bills because we can't serve people if we can't pay our bills, right? Mm-hmm. So that is important. But when the very first question is, how do we make more money? How do we get more users? How do we get more of their data? What can we do with that data to make even more money? When that's the whole philosophy behind it, it separates humanity from what we're actually doing. And a lot of coaches, not even just in software, really do have the mentality of, okay, we gotta find more. We gotta find more. Like I need you to start stepping up with the way that you're acting in front of people, right? Like you need to have that, people need to see that you're tough, right? Like that type of thing. That to me can be a very serious red flag. And a lot of, I don't know where it comes from, but a lot of coaches definitely have that vibe, and right, they go for that. And sure, it might raise your confidence a little bit. Maybe it helps you do a little bit better. But at the end of the day, I'd rather let's get to the core of what you identify as you living a successful life. Like, what does that really mean? And the best way I can describe it is my father he was a very successful entrepreneur. He's retired now, but growing up, a lot of his friends were some of the wealthiest people still to this day I've ever been around. And typically they were the most miserable people I ever met. They had airplanes, they had cars, they had boats, they had everything you can imagine. And I'm like, I couldn't see it then, but now I'm like, oh, that's because that's not where success and happiness and joy and fulfillment comes from. And at the same time, I've met people that really aren't well off. They're living paycheck to paycheck, but man, are they fulfilled? Are they really happy? Do they like the work? Do they love being able to spend time with their family? And do they cherish that meal they get to go out to have together because it might be the only one they get this month, right? It's all a perspective. And I think if a coach can't say, we got to look internally before we start looking at the external factor of the persona that you need to maintain to be successful, right? Quote unquote successful. We got to really question that.
Can we get into, this is going to get a little bit more personal. I really want you to share with everyone, what is it that made you turn it all around? Can you share that story with us?
Yeah, it started with a rock bottom real estate and Alex Sanfilippo crash, right? Because I was very connected to the market at that point. I had a software company that was in the actual real estate space. I was working with realtors. I was doing some investing, like all those things. And I didn't know what was about to happen. So I was buying property in 2006, which was like the height of it, right? So, and I was like, man, in a year from now, this is going to be worth double, because that's what we all believed. There was very few of us that could ever see that. And when that crash happened, my money dried up. The company I had, I didn't even sell it. I gave it to one of the people working in it. There was nothing to sell. We went from working on 30 projects a day to one a month. I'm going to show you this, like, and everyone remembers 2006, 7, 8, 9, right? Like those were tough years if you're in that space. And so I got out of it. My dad being an entrepreneur, I was like, can I get a job? And he's like, no, but I can get you an interview somewhere. And having the last name in that industry helped me get a part-time job. I was breaking down boxes and taking out trash in a warehouse. And that's what I was doing. So I went from like this guy who's like on top of the world, crushing it, to a very humble part-time job. And then moving into one of my rental properties because I couldn't afford to do anything else with it. It was either that or just turn it over, right? And so at that point, the relationship was ended because it was very focused on the money, right? The car disappeared. The friends, quote unquote, that I had, they weren't around anymore. They weren't there for the deep stuff, right? They were there for the parties, for the fun times. And man, like everything that I was struggling with, I was able to hide with what I had, was now full circle, top of mind. And so the depression I felt, the stress that I felt, anxiety was a new feeling for me. I hadn't felt that growing up. And so that was a new feeling for me. Feeling inadequate. All those things were just part of this point in my life. And for the first time ever, I sat in my loneliness. And so I can remember sitting at home alone a lot. I was like, man, like this is my bad investment that I'm living in, right? Like this is where Alex Sanfilippo is. And it was a tough time for me. Full circle, and I'll get back into the story. That was the thing I needed to end up where I am today and become the man I am today, was this. And I'll never forget it. So one day I was just getting my mail, assuming there's going to be tons of bills I couldn't pay, right? But there was a flyer in it. And that's back when we used to get important things in the mail sometimes, right? So I read it, and it was for a young adults church group. And it was like, I recognized the address. I'm like, this is like got to be walking distance from where I live. Like this has got to be right here. And I was like, maybe I'll go to that, because I grew up in church, and I never really thought much of it. And as soon as I was an adult, getting into this lifestyle, it just kind of disappeared. But I was like, I for some reason, I can't even describe why, it sat there for 3 weeks. And I'm like a no junk person. I throw everything away, but it's just sitting there on my counter. I finally decided I'm going to go. I'm just going to go make mom happy at the very least, right? Like at the very least, make mom happy. And I couldn't bring myself to go. I couldn't do it because I knew I was going to get judged. People were going to see who I was, which was a failure. And people were just going to know like, oh, this guy's a total joke. And I just couldn't go. And then, but for some reason I couldn't throw it away. And finally I was like, you know what? Like, I think I prayed for the first time in a long time. I was like, God, maybe I'll go. Maybe you won't judge me. Everyone else will, but maybe you won't. So I went, and people didn't judge me. People were really kind. Even when they started learning about me, they were very just kind people. But that isn't even really what like stood out to me. Like what stood out to me, and I know this isn't like a spiritual podcast or anything like that, but like I felt like something I couldn't explain, but I felt like God met me where I was. And really can't describe the feeling, but I felt this sense of peace, which at that point in my life, that was like, there was nothing better than that, right? Peace is what I needed. And I felt this sense of like, there's something or somebody out there who loves me for who I am, regardless of the mistakes I've made, regardless of how I treated people, regardless of feeling like total failure. And man, that was like when I found myself. And I found myself through who God is. And so I just dove all in on Jesus, if you will. Started reading the Bible, started really like giving my life to that. And very quickly realized that like I had been living wrong and the things I had didn't matter anyway. And at that point, I really committed to making what's truly a meaningful life. I wanted a life built on meaningful experience and helping others and community, collaboration. These are all, oh, thank you. These are all things that I was just like, man, like, that's what I want in my life because that's the feeling I feel that Jesus gave to me. And so I changed. It didn't happen overnight, but I did change.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I mean, as entrepreneurs, we get very like kind of walking on eggshells whenever we discuss spirituality, right? Because there's all different kinds of beliefs out there, and we never want to turn off anybody and make them believe that we're like getting the wrong message. I wanted you to get to that story because I really believe that there's something that happens when we can connect with something bigger, when we can really picture that there is somebody out there that is not going to judge us, that is going to be there for us, that kind of has our back. So for many people, they'll call it the universe, they'll call it source, we'll call it God, right? This is not about religion. This is about having a spiritual connection. And I actually believe that this is actually really important for entrepreneurship because we're jumping into a void, right? Into complete uncertainty. So if we don't feel like we have a strong footing, if we don't believe that that something good can happen from it, like we need to have that belief in something we've never seen. And to me, that is all connected and it's all related. So thank you for sharing that with us, because whatever anybody gets out of the story is not that Alex found Jesus, is that we all need that support. Whatever it is for anybody, get it in whatever way you can, right? I have, my spiritual relationship with God is very different than anybody else's relationship with him, right? But I feel like it has completely changed the way that I look at the world and the way that I make decisions and the way that I jump into something and the way that I structure my own values, right? Just having that really firm set of beliefs, really firm set of values. So I am going to ask you, I just went on a little like rant on like how I believe spirituality is related to entrepreneurship. I'd love to hear yours. Do you believe that there is a tie between being an entrepreneur and going for goals that we can only imagine and having a spiritual life? How are those two things related?
Yeah, I think the way to prove that's related is even you and I, before we hit record, we're both a little bit nervous. We know each other. We're friends. We know the people that run the studio. We've done this a bunch of times, but it's still there. And we immediately said, oh yeah, whenever you listen to some of the biggest names that speak on stages, they still say they feel like they're going to throw up when they get on stage, right? And it's like, man, if we only have ourselves, we are never going to arrive. Like we are never going to hit the point where none of this bothers us anymore. And so because of that, we have to have something to ground to that's bigger than ourselves. And for some, it could be a community, I suppose, right? There could be something there, but the reality is it can't just all be on us. And a lot of entrepreneurs that start achieving success, especially when we're working with a smaller, more intimate audience and building a community around it, people are going to praise you. And the way that you can prove this is like, it always is like, oh man, that's a lot on me, right? Like that's a lot on me. And you have to be willing to say, okay, well, but it isn't ultimately about me. I'm doing something I feel called to do because of my belief. And again, for me, Jesus. And so I've built my entire foundation, my life on that, the business as well. Like, I'm not there to be like, hey, if you want to use my software, you need to believe in Jesus, right? I'm not there to say that, but if you look at our core values, they're very tied to what you can find in the book that is the Bible. And that's what we tie to. And that's why, although I'm nervous, I can tie back to that, which is, yes, you know what? I'm nervous when I get on a stage or when I'm launching a new product or when I'm being transparent about something we're changing or did something wrong. But at the end of the day, I remember that I feel called to love and to serve people because that's the same grace that I've received in my life. So it's not about Alex doing this. It's about that's the foundation that I tie to. And so part of who I am as an entrepreneur is letting that out, letting that go and pulling myself out of the equation. And I'll tell you what, it's helped me share in ways people are like, wow, I've never seen another software owner share the way you do. And it's because it's, well, you know what? My conviction ties me to do that. It's not Alex being Alex. If it's Alex being Alex, we know what that looks like, right? Everyone's heard that today. So I think that, yes, you have to have something beyond you.
You know what you're reminding me of that I think is amazing. So my mother, she has never done any kind of sales in her life. All right. She's skeptical of any sales, but for some reason, she is perfectly capable and in fact, very earnest when she promotes her church workshop, right? She teaches a workshop called Life and Prayer Workshop through the church. And she has no fear about going and telling people about the workshop and going and making calls to people who signed up like, hey, you're going to show up, right? I'm like, Mom, you know that what you're doing is marketing. Like she goes to churches and talks about the workshop and like she gives flyers. I'm like, Mom, you're like a marketing genius. You have no fear. And she's like, no, I'm just like, I just believe in that so much. And I know that it can help so many people that this has nothing to do with me. So if you draw that parallel, it's exactly what you're saying right now. When you know that there is a much bigger purpose, that you can be of service to other people, it becomes a lot less about you. So the imposter syndrome can actually start to fade away, can actually start to like get under control, can get you, Alex, who feels imposter syndrome, still be able to act because this is not about making you happy. This is not about building your life. It's not about making you money. It's about helping others. So it's like it's all connected in a way. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. And you brought up a really good point I want to like drive home a little bit further. And it's this idea that the way you can kind of overcome a lot of this is really being in tune with what it is that you're providing to people. A lot of us feel like, okay, man, it's so hard for me to sell this or to market it. And that's probably because you're not really sure exactly the problem you're solving for somebody. Your mother knows the problem she's solving for somebody. She is extremely confident because she knows at the end of the day, the value they're going to get from it. And as entrepreneurs, we get into this and people start gaining from it. And if we're at all disconnected from the person who's buying our product, our service, any of that, if we have any disconnection there, it's very hard for us to say, this is working really well because I know how it's serving them. But if you can take the time to talk to someone who's using what you have and really listen, you'll learn what it is that you're doing for them. When you know what you're doing for them, you'll grow in your confidence. And so for me, as a software founder, very non-conventional. I get on calls with people who use our software on a regular basis. They might be paying me $6 a month, right? I get on calls with them because I like to hear, and they're like, you really helped me, Alex. Here's what you did. And I just remember that's what I do. That's how I actually help. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, we provide a service that connects podcast guests and hosts for interviews, right? But at the end of the day, what is it that we're really doing? And what it is we're providing a simpler solution to find the outcome to reach the people you're trying to reach faster and more accurately. And removing that stress and anxiety from people is what I'm ultimately doing. So again, removing some of this imposter syndrome is being very in tune with the actual thing that you're solving for somebody. And if you're a coach, what you're helping somebody do is figure out where they are to where they want to go. You're helping them that transformation journey. Perhaps it's emotional, perhaps it's overcoming like a physical fear, right? But the more in tune you are with that, again, you can say, you know what? I know what I do and how I actually show up and help.
I love that. So you mentioned confidence. Do you believe that it should be a given that we need to act even if we are afraid?
Yeah. It means taking courage. Courage means being afraid and doing what you have to do anyway.
How did you do that? We've touched a little bit on, like, you believe in what you're doing and you just go and do it. But there are so many people out there just frozen by the fear. It's almost like the fear is bigger than their desire to achieve more. And they just kind of stay wherever is comfortable. What would you say to people who are currently in that state and they really want to break through, but the fear is just too great?
I'm going to go back to my own story. When I got into that part-time job that I told you about, right? I ended up working my way up. So I actually became, I guess, an intrapreneur, as we call it now, an entrepreneur inside an organization. I worked my way up in this organization over a 15-year period of time. Got to the top of it, got to C-suite. It was a big publicly traded company, multi-billion-dollar organization. Like, it was like the dream, especially at a young age. But I always knew I wanted to go back to entrepreneurship at one point. And so I started Podmatch. And I hit this point where I was working both jobs. Right? I had my corporate job and I had this new venture software. And for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to quit my 9-to-5 job to focus on this full time. Even though the writing was on the wall, the income was there, I couldn't bring myself to do it. And it's because when I looked at this C-suite position job with a big publicly traded company, it's the perks. I didn't even know how to pay my own phone bill at that point, right? Like internet, I'm like, how do you sign up for internet at home, right? How do you do all these things? Just over that period of time, I lost that. And what I realized is I picked up a few books and I was like reading through everything. Like, what am I missing? Like, am I not cut out to do this? Why am I so scared? And what I realized is I had everything right at this point. And I had worked my way to that. So I'm not saying I'm perfect or anything like that, but I was doing everything right, except the one element I was missing was courage. The numbers lined up, everything worked, but the one thing I was lacking was courage. And as I just mentioned, courage means being afraid and then doing what you have to do anyway. And at the end of the day, that's when I started doing the deep soul searching of what is it that I'm actually doing for these people. And when I realized I'm removing the friction that they have in what they do, when I realized that's what it was, that's what gave me the courage to do it. Because I said, you know what? This isn't about me anymore. I'm not here to be a martyr, right? But this isn't about me anymore. I owe it to these people because the company is not growing anymore because of my lack of involvement, which means the people's friction that I'm removing for them is going to end right here. That's the line in the sand unless I make a move. And so the best way to overcome these fears and to take courage is take yourself out of the equation and say, I'm going to do for others what I wish I could do for everyone, right? I can do it for one person. Who's that person on mine that I'm going to serve? And just say, you know what? That person's worth it. I can serve them. I can love them well if I go ahead and put myself on the line. The problem is, and the reason we get so fearful is we put it all on us. I got to make it. I got to achieve this. It's got to be about me. I got to make sure people can see my rise to the top. And again, it's like full circle and everything we've talked about. But if you can let that stuff go and say, you know what? I don't know if this is going to work, but I know that I'm called to serve that person. And the best way I can serve them is by taking courage right now and letting go of myself and stepping into this wholeheartedly and give it the best shot I can to do the best to serve that person. And so to me, when someone's facing fear, that's what you have to do. And it's a very scary decision, but when you get around the right people and you commit to it, you got to just jump.
So let's talk about mistakes. You recently posted on social media something that sounded like, I screwed up. I was wrong about this. So thank you for listening. Well, like, this is what's going on. Can you please share a little bit of what that mistake was?
I come from big corporate, as I've mentioned. And so I think, unfortunately, after 15 years, you kind of think from a big corporate structure. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's not the business I'm building anymore. And I had to keep that in mind. But when I started the software company, we had other ideas of things we wanted to do. I started spinning up other companies. And to your point, when we got started, like, all of them have done really well. And I'm extremely thankful. Of course, everyone sees all the ones that have done well. There's some that, like, we spin it up and 3 weeks later, like, this is a terrible idea, right? Like, and that's just how it goes. But so I had all these other companies. So I was like, hey, we're going to launch a parent company called PodPros. And that'll be the company over all these, just like Meta has Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and hundreds of other companies, right? Like Alphabet to Google to all their other products as well. I was like, that's how big software companies do it. Big corporate mindset. That's how big companies do it. And so I got into this and I realized it was actually causing confusion. A regular question I was receiving from people was like, hey, Alex, so I know what Podmatch is. What's PodPros? And so you're like, is this your product? Or where do I go for this? And I started realizing that, again, I showed up to serve. And the reality is I don't actually want to build a big billion-dollar software company. I have no interest in that type of business at all. I really like the model that we've built, community driven, where I'm able to communicate with people. Like, if you message me on any social media platform, it's me or my wife, Alicia, if I'm really busy, right? It's just the two of us, no virtual assistants, no executive assistants. I'm not saying those things are bad. It's just not the company I wanted to build. But building it in this giant structure, I realized I was doing exactly what I said I didn't want by doing that. I was creating a disconnect between me and the people that I was serving. And so I posted about, you know what, we've started an initiative and I mean, we mind mapped this whole thing out. It's on whiteboards. It's everywhere. We created the plan and basically said, we're going to bring everything into Podmatch because that's the name that is stuck. That's the brand that people love. That's the one that's serving the best. And we're either going to just remove things completely or build it into that, freely included. The idea is one login, one website, one bill, right? And you'll get everything that we have. No upsells are on the way. And that's just what we decided we wanted to do. And I just like to be transparent about it. So I shared that. Yeah, I made a mistake. I realized I was building this thing in the wrong direction. And I'll tell you what, the responses have been extremely positive. I've had so many people email, message, even call me and say, hey, you're making the right choice. Didn't know it, but now I know you're making the right choice. And that was confirmation I'm doing the right thing. I'll be real. I had Alicia read that post before I hit post because I was so nervous. Like to that point, I'm like, my hands are sweating. I'm like, I wrote this. I'm not even like speaking it live. Like I wrote it. And I'm like, can you please look at this? Right? And she's like, this is what we're doing. And I was like, you're right. Post. And so yeah, that's kind of just something that we're going through right now.
What would you say to someone who is listening and they actually thought that, having a parent company sounds like a good idea. They're thinking about rebranding. They actually don't know exactly how to structure things. And they're hearing your story and they're like, well, wait a minute, that makes sense too. What do I do? What would you say is like the general advice for people who are building a company with multiple products? What should they be doing?
First off, it depends on like what niche it's in. Everything I just mentioned is all in podcasting. So bringing it all to Podmatch makes sense because it's all really ultimately serving the same small group of people. If one of them was like a company that mows lawns, we're not going to have that in Podmatch, right? Like then it would make sense to have some sort of parent company. But the reality is you don't necessarily even need to share about a parent company. But if you're in the software space, like some companies, they have very diverse product suites. You do not want to put those together because simplicity wins in software and in most businesses of all kinds these days, right? I don't necessarily want to hire the person to mow my lawn who's also going to fix my washer and dryer, right? Like I'm like, which one are you better at, right? Like, so the simplicity is going to win. And yes, if it makes sense, have that there, but maybe that's just something you use internally versus having it all like said. And the reality is you might be like, no, I really liked your original model. And if that's the case and that's the business you want to build, then do it. It's not really a right or wrong way. I'm just sharing some best practices based off what I've seen. So there's really no right or wrong way, but I just know that having just Podmatch simplifies the messaging, and makes it easy for everyone else and allows me to be front facing much longer because I'm not like trying to be front facing on 12 different fronts.
We've gotten to the point of the episode where I want you to use this opportunity, this platform to speak to the world. What message do you have for everyone that you really need them to know right now?
Yeah, the hustle culture has just got to stop in entrepreneurship and in business. And I think that the days of us seeing like, we got to be on the grind, we need more followers, we need more of this, right? More monthly reoccurring revenue, more income coming through, more houses, more cars. Like that's got to be behind all of us at some point. I'm not sharing anything groundbreaking today from that regard of those people that have all that aren't necessarily happy. I mean, you can see this almost easily at this point. Like we've learned that that's just how it is. These people have coaches just for their anxiety at times, and they have the money to be able to support that. I'm not dogging those things. Like those results can happen. But if the entire idea is that's the result I want and everything else I'll build on that, that foundation is the sand. And you want to build a foundation on something so much more solid. So the message I want to get out is to pull yourself out of that equation, find something beyond you that you believe in. That why has to be bigger than you for what you do. Find that solid foundation, that rock that you can start to build on, and let that become your foundation and say, you know what? If I get 1 million followers, if I get $1 million on the way, great. But I sleep really well, knowing I'm showing up, doing what it is I said I was showing up to do. And the way I like to always present this is to do for one what you wish you could do for all. There is one person who needs your voice. There is one person who is hurting, who's in pain, who can't seem to solve a problem, but you're the person who can solve it for them. And you might be like, well, Alex, I'm a comedian. Great. Maybe they need to laugh. What if they're like Alex at 19 and they're miserable, right? Maybe they just need someone to make them laugh. And if that's the case, then be that person to make them laugh. But the more we can get in tune again with that why that's bigger than us and that one person we really show up to serve, we can change the world that way. If everyone impacted one life today, tomorrow the world would look different. And I firmly believe that. And that's the message I want to get out to the world.
That's amazing. Can you please tell us, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have of you?
That I'm fake. I get that a lot, especially when I meet people in person. I had a guy who I thought was a really close friend, but we'd only met online. We met in person. He goes, you know what, Alex? I thought you were going to be a real jerk when we met. And I was like, what? And he goes, I just assumed everything like about you was fake. He goes, but you're actually like totally legit. And he's like, do you ever just get mad and like punch stuff? I was like, no. I'm like, at one point in my life, maybe, but not now. And so I think a lot of people think that my kindness is just a facade for how can I get you to give me some money, right? And I don't mean to come across that way. I try to be as genuine as I can. I just think it's so counterculture, especially in the world that we're in. Until I can actually get a face-to-face with you, I guess it's hard to tell. And the thing is, I'm not trying to be liked by everybody. I like who I am, and this is truly who I am. And I don't get upset about it, but sometimes Alicia gets really, she's like, man, these people like are being so rude about how you're being nice because they think it's fake. And so, yeah, the biggest misconception about me is that like, oh, Alex can't really be that way. And the reality is I am, and I'm very happy with it.
Well, you keep being your wonderful self because I can see it and I love it and I never want you to change it. And everybody else who thinks it's fake, they just need to take my word for it because I would not steer them wrong. You're just the nicest guy in the world. So if everybody who's listening had to do one thing and they have to do it in the next 24 hours, what do you think that thing should be?
Put your phone away, turn off your TV, turn off your music, all of it. Grab pen and paper. Super old school, but paper. I don't know if you ever heard of it.
I heard of it.
You heard of it. Yeah.
Dunder Mifflin sells some wonderful paper.
Dunder Mifflin, get you some paper.
That's
Take
right.
Pen and paper, that's it. And go somewhere that you find inspiration or energy from. For me, it happens to be the ocean. We're here in Jacksonville, Florida right now recording this. We're just a few minutes from the ocean. If I'm doing this practice, I'm taking that pen and paper and sitting by the ocean because that's where I get inspired. Go somewhere that inspires you and just start writing what you think. Just sit back and say, where am I in life? What has worked in my life? What hasn't worked in my life? What have been some highs and some lows? Who do I really care about? What makes me mad? What makes me happy? And those are, I just riffed off some questions. Go through even more of them and just start writing all this stuff down. Doing this self-reflective act will help you discover who you are today, but also where it is that you really want to go. And again, I find in today's society, because we're so fast, we're always looking for the next thing. We don't stop to think, is my life heading in an intentional direction? Or am I a product of the culture that I've surrounded myself with? And so for me, pen and paper, do some of that deep reflecting, ask yourself tough questions, will give you this perspective on yourself and your future that is probably more beautiful than the way that you're heading right now.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being so open with this conversation and letting me go to all those amazing places. Can you please tell everybody where to go and follow you, where they can learn more about Podmatch?
Yeah, thank you again. Seriously, an honor to be here. Podmatch.com/free gets you into my entire world. And I mentioned it earlier, but if you reach out in any way, it's going to be me. So podmatch.com/free will show you all the things I can help with. And just spoiler, it's all podcasting related, but that's what I can help with. And that's how I can serve.
Well, I'm going to be putting those links below. Thanks everybody for being here. Alex, thank you. You are the best. Really, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again. I appreciate it.